A captain is the undisputed king of his domain, a modern-day charioteer of the seas. For Captain Marcus Thorne, the bridge of his oceanic luxury cruises vessel wasn't just a navigation deck, it was his throne room, 40,000 nautical miles above the judgment of ordinary men. He was a master of his craft, a sailor with a flawless record and a golden boy reputation to match. But on a routine 7-day cruise from Miami to the Caribbean, a simple forward request from a passenger would ignite a firestorm that would consume his career. He refused to greet a black woman standing at his bridge door. What he didn't know was that this passenger wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was the storm itself, sent by the board to discover the one thing the ship's log could never capture: the character of the man in the captain's seat. Captain Marcus Thorne believed in sterility, not the medical kind, but the operational kind. His pre-departure safety check was a sacred ceremony conducted with the precision of a surgeon. Every switch, every gauge, every line of the checklist was a verse in his litany. He walked through the embarkation terminal at the port of Miami with an aura of untouchable authority, his silver-striped epaulets gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His first officer, Michael Chen, a sharp and ambitious sailor 10 years his junior, walked a respectful half-step behind. Morning, Captain. The embarkation staff member, a cheerful woman named Lisa, greeted him. Marcus offered a curt nod, his eyes already scanning the cruise route on his tablet. Weather over the open seas looks a bit choppy. Did the final weight and balance sheet come through? He didn't make eye contact. He didn't need to. He was the commander of the Sapphire Seas Princess, a flagship route on a flagship vessel. He was the destination. Inside the bridge, the world outside fell away. This was his sanctuary, a symphony of glowing screens and muted chimes that only he could truly conduct. Michael, ever the professional, began his own methodical checks. He respected Marcus's skill. It was legendary within the company, but he often felt the chill from the captain's chair. It wasn't just professionalism. It was a cold, impenetrable wall. Passenger boarding commenced. From his perch, Marcus could hear the faint murmur of passengers, the beeps of scanned cruise cards, the friendly greetings of the crew. Head of Guest Services, Susan Riley, a veteran with a warm smile and eyes that missed nothing, ran her team with quiet efficiency. As the suite deck filled, a woman paused at the open bridge door. She was in her late 50s, elegantly dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored bright blue blazer and gray slacks. Her hair was styled in short, tasteful locks, and her face, framed by sophisticated glasses, held an expression of calm intelligence. This was Dr. Evelyn Reed. She smiled warmly at Michael, who was visible in the first officer's seat. "Good morning, gentlemen. Looks like a beautiful day for a cruise." Michael, ever polite, turned and smiled back. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome aboard. Should be a smooth ride for us today." Marcus did not turn. He did not acknowledge her. He continued to tap methodically at the navigation management system, his focus absolute. Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. She spoke again, her voice clear and polite, directed at the unmoving captain. "Captain, I just wanted to wish you a safe voyage." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael glanced nervously at Marcus, whose jaw was set. After a beat, without turning his head, Marcus spoke, his voice clipped and devoid of any warmth. "First Officer Chen, the door." It was a dismissal as sharp as a slap. It wasn't just a request. It was an order laden with contempt. The message was clear. A passenger had breached the sterile barrier of his domain, and he would not dignify it with a response. "What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video." Michael's face flushed slightly. "Yes, Captain." He gave Evelyn an apologetic look as he reached for the handle. Susan Riley, who had been standing nearby, witnessed the entire exchange. Her professional smile tightened at the edges. She stepped forward smoothly. "Right this way, ma'am. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Some champagne, perhaps?" Evelyn turned her attention to Susan, her warm demeanor returning instantly. "That would be lovely. Thank you, Susan," as she was escorted to her penthouse suite, Deck 7, Room 2145. She took a small leather-bound notebook from her handbag. She didn't write in it immediately. She simply placed it on her lap, her fingers resting on the cover, her gaze thoughtful as she watched the dock crew making their final preparations outside her window. The first test had been administered. The subject had failed. In the bridge, Michael settled back into his seat, the click of the heavy door sealing them in. He felt an uncomfortable tension in the air. "She was just being friendly, Marcus," he ventured, trying to keep his tone neutral. Marcus finally looked at him, his blue eyes like chips of ice. "Our job, Michael, is to sail a 200,000-ton vessel with 278 souls on board across an ocean. It is not to entertain passengers." Professional distance is paramount. Let the stewards handle the pleasantries. That's what they're paid for. Remember that. He turned back to his instruments. The matter closed in his mind, but for Michael a seed of doubt was planted. He had always been taught that a captain's command extended to the entire ship, setting the tone for the crew and ensuring the comfort of the passengers. Marcus Thorne's command felt less like leadership and more like a dictatorship, built on a foundation of cold, unyielding arrogance. He had no idea how deeply that foundation was about to be shaken. The Oceanic Luxury Cruises vessel, the Sapphire Seas Princess, sailed gracefully out of Miami port waters, a silver dart cutting the endless blue. Below them, the city shrank into a glittering map, and soon they were over the cold gray expanse of the Atlantic. For Marcus, this was where life made sense. The complexities of human interaction faded away, replaced by the pure, clean logic of naval architecture, meteorology, and machine. Sapphire Princess. 101. Contact Coast Guard on 13,345. Good day. The voice from the Port Authority crackled. 13,345 for Sapphire Princess. 101. Good day, Michael replied, his voice a model of radio proficiency. Marcus grunted in approval. Chen was a good sailor. Technically sound, a little soft perhaps, a bit too eager to please, but he was competent. That was all that mattered in this box. In the penthouse suite, Dr. Evelyn Reed savored her champagne. She wasn't angry. Anger was a useless emotion, a fog that clouded judgment. Instead, she was an observer, a scientist gathering data. The captain's refusal to greet her was a significant data point, but it was just one. The Phoenix Initiative, as Chairman David Sterling had named it, was designed to be holistic. The board was concerned about a growing disconnect between the sea crews and the company's stated values of inclusivity and customer service. Complaints of crew arrogance, particularly on premier routes, were ticking upward. They needed to know if the problem was systemic or isolated. So they sent one of their own, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a retired Coast Guard captain, naval architect, and the newest member of the Oceanic Luxury Cruises Board of Directors. To find out, her file on Captain Marcus Thorne was thick, impeccable sailing record. Graduated top of his class from the Maritime Academy, a legacy sailor. His father, George Thorne, was a near-mythical figure who had helmed large ocean liners for Oceanic Luxury Cruises in its heyday. But there were whispers, too. Notes from HR about interpersonal friction with stewards, to formal complaints from stewards over the last 5 years, both dismissed due to a lack of definitive evidence in Marcus's sterling record. An hour into the voyage, a yellow caution light flickered on the engine indicating in crew alerting system, generator drive. A generator drive on the port engine was showing elevated temperatures. It wasn't critical, not yet, but it was an anomaly. I've got it, Marcus said, his voice flat. He quickly navigated through the checklists on his screen. Looks like an intermittent sensor failure. Oil temp is stable. Vibrations are nominal. We'll monitor it. Michael cross-referenced his own display. Agreed. All other engine parameters are green. It's likely a faulty thermocouple, likely, Marcus echoed, his tone implying that Michael's confirmation was superfluous. Just keep an eye on it. I don't want Susan's teams booking the passengers over a ghost in the machine. It was a subtle dig, a small assertion of dominance that positioned the crew as emotional and prone to panic. While he remained the stoic, logical commander, Michael clenched his jaw slightly. He knew Susan Riley. She was one of the most professional heads of guest services in the fleet. She wouldn't spook anyone. As if on cue, the rough seas hit. The vessel, which had been sailing smoothly, began to shudder and sway. It wasn't a gentle rocking that lulls passengers to sleep, but a sharp, jarring series of jolts. The safety protocol sign chimed on, and Marcus's voice, now transformed into a silken, reassuring baritone, came over the PA. Folks, this is your captain speaking. We've hit a small patch of unexpected storm-related seas. Nothing to be concerned about. I've got the safety protocol sign on, and I'm going to ask the stewards to take their seats. For a few moments. We should be through it in about 10 to 15 minutes. In the passenger deck, Evelyn watched. She saw Susan and her team move with practice calm, securing the galley carts and checking on passengers. She noted the anxious look on a young mother's face and saw another steward, a young man named Ben, stop to offer a reassuring word. They were a good team. Then she saw Susan approach the front of the deck and use the intercom to call the bridge. Bridge, deck is secure, acknowledged was Marcus's clipped reply. The rough seas worsened. A sudden lurch sent a few loose items skittering across the main galley floor. Evelyn, a veteran of countless military transport voyages, was unbothered by the motion. What she was interested in was the crew's response. From her seat, she could just hear a snippet of conversation between two stewards seated in the jump seats. He's a fantastic sailor, but a nightmare to work with, one whispered. He treats us like glorified waiters. Tell me about it, the other replied. My last trip with him. He chewed out Maria for bringing him the wrong kind of mineral water in front of the first officer. Just ice cold, these were the data points Evelyn was collecting. The official records told one story. The hushed conversations and weary glances told another. In the bridge, Michael was scanning the weather radar. There's a bigger cell building to our north. We could deviate 20 south to get clear of the worst of it. Negative, Marcus said immediately. We stay on course. Deviating costs fuel and time. This is manageable. The ship stabilizers are designed to flex. Let the vessel do its job. It could get much rougher for the passengers and crew in the back. Michael pressed gently. They'll manage, Marcus retorted, his eyes locked forward. A little chop is good for them. Reminds them who is in charge. That single sentence sent a chill down Michael's spine. It wasn't about fuel or efficiency. It was about power. It was about Marcus Thorne reminding everyone on board, the crew, the passengers, and perhaps even his own first officer, that their comfort was secondary to his command. He wasn't just sailing the ship. He was imposing his will upon it, and everyone within it. Evelyn, still watching from her seat, made a quiet mental note. A captain who prioritized his ego over the well-being of his passengers and crew was a captain with a dangerously flawed judgment. The generator light had been a test of technical skill. The rough seas, it seemed, were a test of character, and Captain Thorne was failing spectacularly. The rough sea subsided after 20 minutes, leaving a trail of rattled nerves in its wake. Susan Riley and her team were back on their feet immediately, their smiles practiced and reassuring as they cleared away spilled drinks and offered comfort. Susan made her way to Deck 7, room 2145. Dr. Reed, are you all right? Can I get you anything? I'm perfectly fine. Susan, thank you. Evelyn replied, her voice warm. You and your team handled that beautifully. True professionals. Susan's smile became genuine. Thank you, ma'am. We do our best. She paused, then lowered her voice slightly. It's always a bit bumpier with Captain Thorne. It was a loaded statement, and Evelyn knew it. It wasn't a comment on his sailing skills, but on his choices. How so? She asked, her tone inviting confidence. He prefers to punch through weather rather than go around it, Susan explained, choosing her words carefully. He calls it efficient. We call it uncomfortable. It saves a few minutes, maybe 100 gallons of fuel. But it costs a lot in passenger comfort and spilled coffee. She gave a wry, weary smile. I see. Evelyn said. It was another crucial piece of the puzzle. Thorne's arrogance wasn't just personal. It was operational. It directly impacted the passenger experience. That oceanic luxury cruises spent millions of dollars a year marketing as serene and luxurious. Evelyn decided it was time for another observation. She unbuckled her cruise card. I think I'll stretch my legs for a moment. She made her way to the forward main galley, where Susan was busy organizing the service cards. Evelyn feigned a slight stumble as she reached for a bottle of water. Whoops. A little unsteady on my feet still. No problem at all, ma'am, Susan said, steadying her with a hand on her arm from this vantage point. Near the bridge door, Evelyn could hear the low murmur of the captain's voices. The generator issue was still on their minds. The temperature is still hovering at the upper limit of the normal range, Michael's voice said, a note of concern in it. If it tips into the amber band again, the checklist recommends we disconnect the generator. The checklist is a recommendation. First officer, not a gospel, Marcus's voice cut back, sharp and condescending. It's a sensor ghost. I'm not taking a primary generator offline for a ghost. It would trigger a cascade of unnecessary messages and put a note in the tech log that some poor crew engineer will waste a day trying to chase. We will monitor it. That's final. Michael's reply was inaudible, but the tone of Marcus's next words was unmistakable. It was the voice of a man berating a subordinate. Listen to me, Chen. Part of being a captain isn't just knowing how to sail the ship. It's knowing when to ignore the noise. The book can't teach you instinct. My father sailed ocean liners across the Pacific with nothing but a map and a sextant. You think he pulled over for every flickering light? You have good hands, but you're too reliant on the computer. You need to develop some backbone. Outside, Evelyn's expression remained neutral, but inside, a cold anger was beginning to form. This was more than just arrogance. This was a captain actively dismissing established safety protocols and belittling his first officer for adhering to them. It was a toxic style of leadership that could have catastrophic consequences. The old cowboy sailor mentality that his father may have embodied was precisely what modern maritime safety culture, the crew resource management (CRM) that was drilled into every new sailor, was created to eliminate. Marcus wasn't just old-fashioned, he was dangerous. Evelyn took her bottle of water and returned to her seat. She opened her leather notebook for the first time. The pen flowed across the page, her handwriting small and precise. Incident 1, refusal of passenger greeting. Initial boarding displays contempt for customer-facing role. Establishes hostile non-bridge environment. Incident 2, operational decision-making rough seas. Prioritize voyage time, fuel marginal over passenger, crew comfort and safety. Dismissive of faux input. Quote, reminds them who is in charge. Incident 3, crew resource management generator. Actively belittled foe for following standard operating procedures. Invoked anecdotal outdated practices fathers sailed ocean liners. To override manufacturer checklist. Fostering a bridge gradient that discourages open communication. She paused, tapping her pen on the page. She wasn't just evaluating a captain anymore. She was documenting a liability, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit waiting to happen. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a difficult captain. He was a clear and present danger to the cruise line, not because he couldn't sail the ship, but because his colossal ego was sailing it for him. The hours ticked by. The sky outside turned from deep indigo to the soft, hazy gray of dawn over the British Isles. The voyage was nearing its end. But for Captain Thorne, the real descent was just beginning. The arrival into Southampton port was, by all technical measures, perfect. Marcus Thorne handled the vessel with the effortless grace of a master. He navigated the busy port area, communicated with the port authority with clipped precision, and painted a perfect docking on the pier, kissing the wharf so gently that it barely woke the sleeping passengers. For him, this was his redemption. Any minor rough seas or mechanical ghosts were forgotten, washed away by the sheer artistry of his seamanship. As the vessel followed the dock departure procedures to the gangway at Terminal 5, he made his final PA announcement, his voice once again, the smooth, authoritative sound of oceanic luxury cruises. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Oceanic Luxury Cruises and your entire crew, I'd like to welcome you to Southampton Port. The local time is 7:15 a.m. We hope you enjoyed your voyage with us this morning. He unbuckled his cruise card, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Textbook, he said to Michael, more a declaration than a question. Smooth docking, Captain, Michael agreed, though his praise felt hollow. The tension from the earlier exchange about the generator still lingered in the small space. The gangway connected with a soft bump and the engine spooled down into a gentle whine. Soon the familiar ding signaled that the door was open and passengers could disembark. Susan Riley stood at the door, bidding each passenger farewell with a genuine smile. Evelyn gathered her belongings calmly. She waited patiently for the aisle to clear, allowing other passengers to exit ahead of her. She was one of the last from the suite deck to leave. As she approached the exit, she saw that the bridge door was once again open. Marcus and Michael were standing, completing their post-voyage checks. This was it. The final data point. An opportunity for redemption, however small. She paused at the bridge entrance, her gaze falling first on Michael. First Officer Chen, thank you for a very smooth voyage and a perfect docking. Michael, caught off guard but relieved by the compliment, offered a warm smile. Our pleasure, Dr. Reed. Thank you for cruising with us. Have a wonderful time in London. He had made a point to learn her name from the passenger manifest after the initial snub. Then Evelyn turned her full attention to the captain. Marcus was busy with his voyage bag, pointedly turned away from the door. He had heard her, of course. The space was too small for him not to, yet he remained silent, his back a rigid wall of dismissal. Susan Riley, standing just feet away, watched the scene with a knot forming in her stomach. She could feel the deliberate, icy rudeness radiating from her captain. Evelyn's voice was calm, yet it cut through the deck's quiet hum. Captain Thorne. He stopped what he was doing, but did not turn. Captain Thorne, she repeated, a new edge of steel in her tone. I am a passenger on your vessel. I am speaking to you. The challenge was unmistakable. In that moment, she was no longer just a passenger. She was a woman demanding a basic human acknowledgement that he had twice refused to give. Slowly, Marcus turned, not his whole body, but just his head. His eyes were cold, filled with a mixture of annoyance and disbelief that he was being confronted. He looked down his nose at her, a man on a throne, looking at a commoner who had forgotten her place. He didn't speak. He simply gave her a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, held it for a beat, and then turned back to his bag, zipping it shut with a loud, definitive rasp. The final insult had been delivered. It was more profound than any angry word. It was a complete and total erasure of her presence. Evelyn Reed did not flinch. Her expression hardened into a mask of cold resolve. She held her gaze on his back for a moment longer before turning to Susan. Her voice was quiet but firm. Susan, your name is Susan Riley, correct? Yes, ma'am, Susan said. Her own face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment for her captain's behavior. You have been an absolute credit to this cruise line today. "Thank you," Evelyn said. She then looked at Michael. "You too, Mr. Chen?" With a final meaningful glance at the bridge, she turned and walked down the gangway, her footsteps echoing quietly. Susan watched her go, then looked at her captain, who was now shrugging on his jacket as if nothing had happened. She had been sailing for 15 years. She had seen good captains and bad captains, friendly ones and grumpy ones, but she had never in all her years seen such a deliberate and venomous display of disrespect. It wasn't just poor customer service. It was a deep and ugly flaw in the man's character. Michael Chen felt sick. He finally understood. Marcus Thorne wasn't just arrogant. He was a bully, hiding his prejudice behind the shield of his four stripes. As Marcus strode out of the bridge without another word, Michael leaned against the console, the hum of the auxiliary power unit filling the silence. He had a terrible feeling that Captain Thorne's perfect docking was about to be followed by a very, very turbulent arrival. Marcus Thorne spent his layover in London in a state of self-congratulatory bliss. He had a fine dinner at a steakhouse in Mayfair, slept soundly in the five-star hotel Oceanic Luxury Cruises provided for its senior cruise, and woke the next morning feeling like the king of the world. The voyage had been flawless. He had managed a minor mechanical issue, navigated some weather, and executed a docking that sailors half his age could only dream of. The rude woman at the door was a distant, insignificant memory, and that he had swatted away. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an email from the corporate office in New York. The subject line was stark urgent. Mandatory meeting with Chief of Sail Operations. He read the email. He was to report to Oceanic Tower, the cruise line's gleaming headquarters in Miami. The moment he returned to New York, his return voyage was tomorrow. The meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. A slow smile spread across his face. This was it. It had to be. He was the most senior captain in the fleet. The cruise line had just finalized its massive order for the new luxury vessels to serve the prestigious transatlantic, Alaska, and Dubai routes. They needed a fleet captain to lead the program, a sailor to shape the next generation of Oceanic Luxury Cruises navigators. They were going to offer it to him. The title, the pay bump, the prestige, it was all coming his way. It was his birthright. His arrogance was afire, and this summons was the finest grade of fuel. He spent the rest of his layover mentally preparing his acceptance speech, deciding how he would reorganize the training syllabus. He would instill the discipline and professionalism he felt the younger sailors, like Chen, so desperately lacked. The voyage back to New York was uneventful. He was a passenger this time, seated in the premium deck, and he made a point of critiquing the operating captain's every move in his head. The docking was a bit firm for his taste. The port procedure wasn't efficient. He could do better. He would show them all how it was done. The next day, at 3:45 p.m., Captain Marcus Thorne strode into the lobby of Oceanic Tower. He was immaculate in his full uniform, the uniform he wore like a suit of armor. He nodded curtly to the receptionist and took the express elevator to the 50th floor, the executive level. The air up here was different, rarefied, smelling of money and power. He was greeted by Martha, the executive assistant to the Chief of Sail Operations, a severe-looking woman in her 60s, who had been with the company since his father's era. "Good afternoon, Captain Thorne. They're waiting for you," she said, her tone uncharacteristically flat. She didn't say he. She said they. Marcus felt a flicker of confusion, but dismissed it. Of course, the CEO would want to be in on this. A major appointment like the fleet captain would require the top man's blessing. Martha led him not to the chief sailor's office, but to the main boardroom. The door was a heavy slab of polished mahogany. She opened it and gestured for him to enter. The room was vast, dominated by a table that seemed a mile long. At the far end, silhouetted against a panoramic window with a stunning view of the Miami skyline, sat 3 figures. In the center was David Sterling, the formidable CEO of Oceanic Luxury Cruises, a man known for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. To his right was Bill Sinsky, the Chief of Sail Operations, and to his left, seated in a high-backed leather chair, was a passenger from Deck 7, room 2145. She was no longer dressed in traveler's attire. Today she wore a sharp, dark gray power suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. The friendly, slightly inquisitive expression was gone, replaced by one of cold, analytical authority. On the table in front of her was a familiar leather-bound notebook. Marcus Thorne stopped dead in his tracks. The air in the room was thick with a silence that was more terrifying than any alarm. The confident smirk on his face evaporated, replaced by a mask of confusion and dawning horror. This wasn't a promotion. This was an ambush. "Captain Thorne," David Sterling said, his voice dangerously calm. "Thank you for coming. Please close the door and have a seat." The chair indicated was a single one positioned in the middle of the room, far from the main table. It was the seat of a defendant. Marcus walked forward, his footsteps deafeningly loud on the polished floor. He felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. He sat, his back ramrod straight, his mind racing. Who was this woman? A VIP? A major shareholder he'd insulted? Sterling leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Captain, we have a problem. A problem of culture. We sell our customers an experience of premium service, respect, and safety. We've come to believe that this promise is being broken by a certain attitude of entitlement within our senior bridge crews. So, the board initiated a program to evaluate that culture firsthand. We call it the Phoenix Initiative. He gestured to the woman beside him. Captain Thorne, I'd like to formally introduce you to your passenger from the Sapphire Princess 101 voyage, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She is a 25-year veteran of the United States Coast Guard, a doctor of naval architecture from MIT, and for the last 6 months, the newest member of the Oceanic Luxury Cruises Board of Directors. The room tilted, the blood drained from Marcus's face. Dr. Evelyn Reed, board member. He hadn't just insulted a passenger. He had insulted his boss, one of the handful of people on the planet who held his multi-million-dollar career in the palm of her hand, and he had, with breathtaking arrogance, snubbed her twice. For a moment, Marcus Thorne's mind went completely blank. The sounds of the room, the faint hum of the HVAC system, the distant traffic from the street below faded into a roaring silence. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Board of Directors. The words echoed in the cavern of his skull, each one a hammer blow against the fortress of his ego. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw past the passenger and saw the woman David Sterling had just described. The quiet confidence, the intelligent eyes, the unyielding posture. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This was a person of immense power and accomplishment, and he had treated her like an inconvenience. He scrambled to recover, his sailor's mind trained to react in a crisis. Mr. Sterling, Dr. Reed, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. His voice, usually so commanding, was thin and reedy. On the bridge, my focus is absolute. We call it the sterile bridge rule. It's a matter of safety to avoid distractions during critical phases of the voyage. It was a weak defense, and he knew it. Passenger boarding was not a critical phase of the voyage. Dr. Reed spoke for the first time, her voice as calm and measured as it had been on the deck. The sterile bridge rule, Captain, as defined by the Coast Guard, applies during dock departure procedures and in restricted waters. It does not apply while docked to the pier during boarding. Furthermore, it is meant to prohibit extraneous conversation that could distract from duties. A two-word greeting, good morning, does not fall into that category. You know this. I know this. She opened her notebook. My evaluation, however, goes far beyond your refusal to greet me. Let's talk about your operational command. She looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. Let's talk about the rough seas, Captain. First Officer Chen suggested a deviation of 20 to avoid a building weather cell. You denied his request, stating, and I have the bridge recorder transcript right here, a little chop is good for them. Reminds them who is in charge. Who? Captain, were you reminding? Marcus's mouth went dry. The bridge voice recorder. They had pulled the BVR. The sanctity of his throne room had been violated. Its secrets laid bare on this boardroom table. That comment was taken out of context, he stammered. It was a tense moment, a bit of gallows humor. There was nothing humorous about it, Bill Sinsky, the chief of sail operations, interjected. His face grim. It displayed a stunning disregard for the passengers and the crew you are charged with protecting. It speaks to a mindset of command, not of leadership. Dr. Reed continued, relentless. Let's move on to the generator drive caution light. An intermittent sensor failure. You called it a ghost in the machine. First Officer Chen, correctly following protocol, noted that if the temperature entered the amber band, the checklist recommended disconnecting the generator. You overruled him. She flipped a page in her notebook. Your words to him were, the checklist is a recommendation, not a gospel. You need to develop some backbone. You then invoked your father's legacy as a justification for ignoring modern safety procedures. Captain, do you know what crew resource management is? Of course I do, Marcus snapped, a flash of his old arrogance returning. Then you must know that your actions were a textbook example of how to destroy it, she retorted, her voice hardening. You created a hostile bridge gradient. You belittled your first officer for his diligence. You intimidated him into silence. A captain who cannot take input from his first officer is a single point of failure. In this industry, Captain Thorne, we eliminate single points of failure. We do not promote them. The mention of promotion was a deliberate, cruel twist of the knife. Marcus visibly flinched. Sterling spoke again. The final insult, of course, was at disembarking. Given a second chance to show a shred of human decency, you chose contempt. You chose to deliberately and silently disrespect not just Dr. Reed, but a representative of this company's ownership. You did this in front of your first officer and your head of guest services. He pressed a button on the conference phone. Martha, please send them in. The boardroom door opened. In walked First Officer Michael Chen and Head of Guest Services Susan Riley. They both looked nervous, but their expressions were resolute. They avoided looking at Marcus. Mr. Chen, Sterling said gently, please tell us in your own words about the atmosphere on the bridge during the Sapphire Princess 101 voyage. Michael took a deep breath. It was tense, sir. Captain Thorne made it clear that my input was not welcome. I felt that my concerns regarding the weather and the generator were dismissed, not on their technical merits, but as a way of asserting his authority. Ms. Riley, Sterling said, turning to Susan, describe the interactions you witnessed between Captain Thorne and Dr. Reed. Susan's voice was steady. Dr. Reed was polite and friendly at all times. Captain Thorne refused to acknowledge her, both at boarding and disembarking. His dismissal of her at the end of the voyage was the most unprofessional and deliberately rude act I have ever witnessed from a captain in my 15 years of sailing. The testimonies hung in the air irrefutable. Marcus looked from their faces to the cold, unforgiving eyes of the executives. The walls were closing in. The weight of 278 souls he had boasted of carrying was now the weight of 278 witnesses to his hubris. He tried one last desperate gambit. I have a perfect record. 20 years of sailing for this cruise line without a single incident. My technical skill is beyond reproach. Are you really going to throw that away over a personality conflict? Dr. Evelyn Reed leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his, and for the first time, her calm facade cracked to reveal a deep personal fire. My brother was a first officer on the Star Seeker cruise, she said, her voice low and intense. The one that sank in the Gulf. Do you know why it sank, Captain? Because a burned-out indicator lighted $20 bulb completely absorbed the attention of the captain, the first officer and the chief engineer. They were so focused on the ghost in the machine that no one was steering the ship. They sailed a perfectly good vessel right into a reef. 101 people died. She let that sink in. The entire concept of modern CRM was born from the ashes of that disaster. The idea that a first officer, a chief engineer, even a steward should be empowered to speak up without fear of being belittled by a captain with an ego. What you call a personality conflict, Captain Thorne, I call the primary ingredient in every major maritime disaster of the last 50 years. Your technical skill means nothing to me. It is a prerequisite for the job, not a defense for your character. And your character, sir, is a liability this cruise line can no longer afford. The finality in her voice was absolute. Marcus Thorne, the untouchable golden boy, the king of the seas, was finally, irrevocably grounded. The silence that followed Dr. Reed's devastating indictment was not empty. It was a dense, heavy presence, pressing in on Marcus Thorne from all sides. The story of the Star Seeker cruise, a ghost that haunted every sailor's training, had been personally delivered to his doorstep, and its chilling message was clear. His arrogance was the same fatal flaw that had sent 100 souls to their deaths. David Sterling leaned forward, the finality of his posture like a judge donning a black cap. Marcus Thorne, he began, his voice devoid of heat, but colder and sharper than any shout. Effective immediately. You are terminated from your position as captain with Oceanic Luxury Cruises. The grounds are gross misconduct, a willful and dangerous disregard for established crew resource management protocols, and a pattern of behavior that is fundamentally incompatible with the values and safety standards of this company. Termination. The word was an absurdity, a clerical error. Marcus stared at Sterling, his mind scrambling to process the input. But it was like a computer trying to make sense of corrupted data. Him terminated. He was Marcus Thorne, son of George Thorne, a captain with a 20-year record so clean it practically shone. You can't be serious, he heard himself say, his own voice sounding distant and thin. 20 years. Not a single mark on my record. Not one incident. I am one of your most senior captains. My technical skill. Your technical skill is the bare minimum required to sit in that chair, Captain. It is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, Dr. Reed cut in, her voice slicing through his defense. Let me be clear. Your record isn't clean. It's simply a record of incidents that never happened. Accidents that were narrowly avoided, not because of your skill, but in spite of your hubris. How many first officers like Mr. Chen have you intimidated into silence? How many times has your ego made the final decision when procedure and caution should have? We see your perfect record not as an asset, but as a 20-year statistical anomaly, a lucky streak. And this board, Mr. Thorne, doesn't gamble with lives. Bill Sinsky, the chief of sail operations and a man Marcus had once considered a colleague, slid a file across the table. And it's not just about termination, Marcus. This goes further. His tone was laced with a weary disappointment that was somehow more wounding than Sterling's. Anger. As mandated by our operational charter and by federal law, we are filing a comprehensive report with the United States Coast Guard. The report will contain the bridge recorder transcript, the voyage data recorder logs showing your decision to sail through the rough seas, and sworn testimony from First Officer Chen and Head of Guest Services Riley. Sinsky took a deep breath. It will detail your deliberate disregard for standard operating procedures, your active creation of a hostile and unsafe bridge environment, and what the Coast Guard refers to as a failure to exhibit the care, judgment, and responsibility required of a master mariner. We will be formally recommending a full top-to-bottom review of your master mariner license. This was a blow that shattered his composure. Getting fired was a corporate matter. This was a professional crucifixion. A Coast Guard review of this nature was a scarlet letter. It meant he was not just unemployed. He was unemployable. No reputable carrier in North America, Europe, or Asia would touch a captain with that kind of mark on his file. He was being cast out of the brotherhood, exiled from the only world he had ever known. He looked around the room, a wild, desperate plea in his eyes. This was his life, his identity, everything he had built, turning to smoke. Then David Sterling delivered the final, most exquisitely cruel blow. The irony of all this, Marcus, is the timing, the CEO said, a slight, mirthless smile touching his lips. Before Dr. Reed's voyage, this board had unanimously approved your promotion. We're investing $10 billion in a new fleet of luxury vessels. We needed a new fleet captain to head the program, someone with seniority, a strong technical background, someone we thought was the best of the best. That job was yours. The office on this floor, the salary, the prestige of shaping the future of this cruise line, it was all yours for the taking. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs, a silent, guttural gasp. The luxury vessels, the crown jewel. It wasn't just a rumor. It was real, and it had been his. That position, Sterling continued, his gaze shifting to a point beyond Marcus, as if he were no longer even in the room, requires more than just technical skill. It requires a leader who inspires, who fosters absolute trust, who understands that respect is the bedrock of safety. A leader who treats the person cleaning the lavatory with the same dignity as a member of this board. His eyes snapped back to Marcus. You proved in the most spectacular fashion imaginable that you are not that leader. He paused, letting the weight of the lost opportunity crush what little was left of Thorne's spirit. The selection committee is meeting tomorrow. We will be offering the position of fleet captain along with the full rating and command training to a sailor who demonstrated extraordinary grace under pressure, a commitment to procedure, and the moral courage to stand up for what is right. We're giving the job to Michael Chen. Michael Chen, the name was a white-hot poker in his brain. The quiet, diligent first officer he had dismissed as a weak, bookish subordinate was being handed his crown. The man he had tried to break was now being chosen to build the cruise line's future. The karmic justice was so absolute, so devastatingly perfect, it defied comprehension. Marcus Thorne said nothing. There were no words left. He was a hollowed-out shell. Security guards waiting discreetly outside entered the room. He was escorted from the boardroom, his walk stiff and robotic. He passed Martha, the executive assistant, who looked at him not with pity, but with a cool, knowing disapproval. In the elevator, he stared at his reflection in the polished steel, the immaculate uniform, the silver-striped epaulets, the wings on his chest. It was all a costume now, the uniform of a king who had been deposed. At the security desk in the lobby, he surrendered his company ID. He watched as the guard swiped it through a deauthorizer. The magnetic strip that gave him access to bridges and crew lounges around the world, erased with a single indifferent motion. That evening, his father called. Marcus had been dreading it. He hoped the old man would be furious, would shout, would promise to fight for him. But the voice that came through the phone was frail and heavy with a sorrow. That was infinitely worse. I spoke to Bill Sinsky, George Thorne said, his voice raspy. He told me everything. Dad, they twisted it. It was a misunderstanding. Was it a misunderstanding that you berated your first officer for following a checklist? Marcus, was it a misunderstanding that you refused to greet a passenger? Not once, but twice. I sailed vessels held together with rivets and prayer. But I never, not once, forgot that my first duty was to the safety and comfort of the people who put their trust in me. I never forgot that the man sitting beside me was my partner. Your record is meaningless if your character is flawed. A sailor's honor is all he has. There was a long, painful pause. You didn't just lose a job today, son. You disgraced the wings I pinned on your chest myself. The line went dead. The months that followed were a blur of legal fees and humiliation. The Coast Guard suspended his license for 2 years, pending retraining and a psychological evaluation, and he knew he would never pass. His name was Mud. The final chapter of his story was written not in the gleaming hubs of Miami or London, but in the desolate, frozen landscape of Alaska at a small, desperate cargo outfit. A company that didn't ask too many questions gave him a job. His new throne was the left seat of a rattling, unpressurized cargo vessel, hauling drilling equipment and supplies to remote oil fields. His new reality was a brutal contrast. The silken roar of the luxury vessel's engines was replaced by the deafening, vibrating thunder of the old ship. The 5-star layovers were replaced by drafty bunkhouses smelling of stale coffee and diesel. His passengers were no longer people with names and families, but inanimate boxes strapped to the floor. He sailed through treacherous weather, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, navigating icy channels, where a single mistake meant a fiery death in an unforgiving wilderness. He had finally achieved the sterile bridge he'd always craved. No passengers, no stewards, no first officers, just the endless howling wind in the cold, heavy weight of his own company. He was a ghost in the machine, a king in an empire of ice, forever sailing but going nowhere. This story serves as a powerful real-world reminder that in any profession, character is just as important as skill. Captain Thorne was a master of the machine, but a failure as a human being. He believed his technical prowess placed him above basic decency, a mistake that cost him everything. His hard fall from grace shows us that karma isn't a mystical force. It's often the direct, logical consequence of our own actions. The world has a way of holding up a mirror to who we truly are, and arrogance is a debt that always gets collected. True leadership isn't about commanding from a throne. It's about serving with humility, respecting those around you, and understanding that your title doesn't define you. Your actions do.